Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Jose Flores and this is my final assignment in my Population Issues class taught by Professor Aaron S. Johnson at the Metropolitan State University of Denver. Today I will be talking to you about three items. The first one being Marxist approaches to population growth. Second one is the population dynamics and crisis in Rwanda, and the third one is the fertility in the more developed region. These items were of particular interest to me during the semester. The first item is from Chapter 1, second is from Chapter 8, and then the third one is from Chapter 10. So let's go ahead and begin with the Marxist approaches to population growth. Karl Marx saw the basis of capitalism as being the profit that the owner makes from the surplus value of the worker's productivity, which is the difference between the true value of the worker's activities and the wage paid to the worker. Marx's view was that the source of poverty was not a high rate of population growth, but rather the source of poverty was actually rooted in the inequality in the distribution of resources, because he observed that a small portion of the population would consume most resources in a given society, leaving very little for the remainder of the population. So poverty was attributed to that and not really to growth of population. Marx also questioned the assumption that food production could only increase linearly. He had a great deal of confidence in the potential of technological developments to increase food production. One of the interesting cases that I learned about in this section was there's a region in Kenya called the Machakos region. In 1937, this region had a population of 250,000 people, which was seen as being disastrously overpopulated. Whereas in 2011, that region jumped from 250,000 to 1.5 million inhabitants, and it was actually thriving at that time. And this was a result of agricultural changes that were made due to advancements in food production technology, which allowed the region to grow and to sustain its growth. So that's it for that section. The next section will talk about population dynamics and their crisis in Rwanda specifically. So Rwanda is a small country in the center of Africa. It had in 1990 a population of about 7 million people. In the years 1993 through 1994, the Rwandan Civil War took place, and it is estimated that about 800,000 people died in that civil war. So just under 1 million people died in the civil war in Rwanda in the mid-90s. And so obviously a lot of Rwandans fled the country due to the civil war. They emigrated, and it also was obviously not a very good time to have a child. Rwanda was interesting because there was a clear increase in the crude death rate, and there was a decline in the net migration rate. There was also a decline in the crude birth rate during that time. It almost certainly contributed, the war did rather, to the decline in the crude birth rate. But after the war, the crude birth rate did not increase in Rwanda. And one of the things that I learned that was very interesting for me personally in this section is that most international refugees return to their home country within about 5 years after the disaster that caused them to emigrate in the first place and leave the country. In Rwanda's case, by the year 2000 through 2005, the net migration rate was 0 per 1,000 people. So everything stabilized right around the time that sociological experts have determined is normal after a crisis of this magnitude, as Rwanda showed us. So there was a net immigration was high, and the natural rate of increase had almost recovered to its 1985 through 1990 level. So it spiked and then sort of stabilized. So we see here some images of a mass emigration in Rwanda during the Civil War of 93 and 94. But eventually everything stabilized, thankfully. This is an image that I found especially poignant because it shows, the very real effects of war and how that affected or impacted a population, such as in Rwanda's case. For me personally, and I'll discuss this in a little bit more detail towards the end of the presentation, but this really speaks to me because I will be working with immigrants once I obtain my law degree, which I'm very much looking forward to. And so that's it for now in terms of the section on Rwanda. And then now what I'd like to discuss is fertility in the more developed region. So in terms of the more developed region, that really refers to the countries, mainly the countries that you see here highlighted in blue, which tend to be countries that have more technological advancements as compared to the remainder of the world, better technology in terms of food production and things of that nature. But in most developed countries, the vast majority of women think that contraception is morally acceptable, even though the Catholic Church officially opposes the use of artificial birth control. More and more, this view that the church has is really actually not reflected in the behavior of Catholic women, which I thought was kind of ironic. The National Survey of Family Growth, the data in that survey between 1965 to 1988 for currently married white Protestant and Catholic women in the U.S. Found that in 1965 and 1973, Protestant women were significantly more likely than the Catholic women to be using contraception. Whereas in 1982 and 1988, those numbers pretty much stabilized across the board. There was very, very little difference between Protestant women and Catholic women in terms of their use of contraception. Something else I found interesting here was the data from the 2006 through 2008 National Survey of Family Growth showed that among all American women who had ever had sexual intercourse, 99% had used the contraceptive method, and 98% of Catholic women who had ever had sexual intercourse had used contraception. So clearly a huge divergence from the mandates of the church and what people are actually doing in their homes. I found that kind of interesting. So something else that I wanted to share in this section is findings from a Gallup poll that analyzed sort of the feelings that Americans have towards the legality of abortion. So in a Gallup poll that was conducted in 1975 through 2001, it concluded that Americans were supportive of the legality of abortion in two cases. A, in the first trimester of pregnancy, and B, when the health of the mother or of the baby was seriously at risk. Which contrasts where most Americans think that abortion should not be legal. Well, this is actually from the Rwandan Civil War portion, and I'll stop here briefly to go back to that section. Here you see in 1990 through 1995, which was the period where the Civil War took place in Rwanda, where you see a very significant spike downward in the crude birth rate during that time for obvious reasons. So we went from 0 down to almost negative 60 in terms of the crude birth rate per 1,000 population. So it's a negative crude birth rate. And that jumped back, it spiked upwards positively up to 60 per 1,000 population shortly after. And then it stabilized. All right, so I thought that was kind of interesting. Why I put it here, I don't know, total mistake. So back to the abortion issue. So in terms of what most Americans think in as far as abortion being illegal, they feel that there's two cases where abortion should not be legal, meaning after the first trimester of pregnancy, as well as when the reason for the abortion is a matter of choice, such as that the family cannot afford the child. So for those two reasons, most Americans feel that abortion should not be legal. By 1972, shortly before the Roe versus Wade decision, Americans were more favorable to abortion being legal under every circumstance than they had been in 1965. So approval for abortion for various reasons increased between 1965 and the early 70s, and then remained fairly stable after that. There was far less support of the legality of abortion if the reason for the abortion was that the family was poor, the mother wanted an abortion because she was unmarried, or the woman did not want any more children. So it's very interesting how there was a very clear delineation between reasons why Americans or most Americans feel that abortion should be legal and reasons why they feel that abortion should not be legal. So it's not a clear across the board type of issue. Although, and there was a certain Gallup poll that I read about in this section that asked respondents to determine whether they would consider themselves pro-life or pro-choice. They had an option in that Gallup poll of not answering either. But I just thought it was kind of interesting how over time it seems like they really want to put you into one of two camps, even though obviously the abortion issue is a lot more complex than that. And see if there's anything else. So I think that's enough about the abortion issue. And I'm going to actually go to the next section, which is so what? So, meaning why are these ideas that I've discussed important to me? Why did I find them interesting? Why have they caught my attention? And what do these ideas inspire me to do? So for me, I will start with the abortion issue and fertility in the more developed region. For me, I've always been very pro-choice. I've felt that just because, just as I would not want someone telling me kind of what to do with my body or my life, even, I would also and should also, as a human being, afford the same type of respect to women who are in situations which I don't know anything about, who feel that they have to make decisions sometimes that might be difficult ones to make. I should not be someone sitting back and judging them for the decisions that they make in their life, because it's not up to me to do that. And so I chose this deliberately as a topic of exploration in this assignment because I wanted to learn a little bit more about it. And actually I learned a lot more about it, which was great. In terms of what these ideas inspire me to do, going back to the situation with Rwanda that I discussed, as I mentioned earlier, I do definitely want to become a lawyer and work on immigration rights and issues, and help people to immigrate into the United States. So I chose Rwanda specifically because genocide studies is my minor in college, and I wanted to learn more about not only the civil war in Rwanda that caused nearly 1 million people to be slaughtered, but I wanted to find out sort of what the effects were sociologically speaking in terms of migration. How did it impact the population? Did the population stabilize after the war was over or not? And I found that it did, and it's very, very interesting because I know that Rwanda is actually doing very, very well as an African country these days. They've really just pulled together and invested a lot of technology and resources in terms of hydroelectric dams and just harnessing power, and just they're really bringing the country up from nothing, which is really, really, truly impressive for me to know about. And so in terms of what these ideas inspire me to do, they inspire me to keep learning, actually, and that's why I'm in college. I want to continue learning. I've always been a student of life, and there's a lot of power in knowledge, and the more you know, the better off you will be as a human being, I think, in terms of how you relate to other people. And you'll also, I think, be more prone to make better decisions. And that is because you, at a certain point, when you learn so much more about the world that's around you versus just your own little bubble, you tend to take, other people's considerations and experiences as being just as valid as yours, which is something that's super important to me to do. And as far as the now what, in terms of what am I going to do now with that knowledge that I gained this semester in this class, which I'm very, very thankful for. As I mentioned earlier, I am planning on practicing immigration law after I get my bachelor's in international law and human rights from the Metropolitan State University of Denver with a minor in genocide studies. I'm planning on attending the Denver Sturm College of Law and obtaining my JD from there. I want to definitely delve into immigration law as soon as I graduate to help people come into this country legally. I myself was an undocumented immigrant into the country for the first 12 years of my life, and I didn't even know it at the time. But we've got everything straightened away, thankfully. But I've never forgotten that experience. And with all the rhetoric that's going around in Washington and elsewhere in the world, in terms of people looking down on immigrants, the way that I see it, the entire world is either made of immigrants or potential immigrants. All that's missing is a disaster, in my opinion. And you may have someone who's got a cushy life in some country, and everything's going peachy, but all it takes is a disaster, and they're going to want to get out. And that's really the only difference between them and us, I would say. So, truly, also with all the rhetoric going on in Washington, in terms of what's making America great or how to make America great, I think America is already great. I think immigrants are truly what make this country exceptional. I'm not a huge believer in American exceptionalism per se. I think it's just something that they came up with to justify actions in the past. But I truly do think immigrants are exceptional. I've definitely been down that path myself, and I understand what the journey comes with. And so I want to do everything in my power to give back to the community, to give back to the country that has given me so much. So on that note, I want to say thank you, Professor Johnson, for making this a really amazing class. This was a great assignment. I'm glad we're ending the semester on a positive note. So here's my sources. Only the book was what I used for my source for this presentation. And thank you very much. I appreciate your time.